Good morning. If you were to watch the game of basketball played 100 years ago, what would it look like? It would look like two squads of very white, skinny athletes running down the court, bouncing the ball. You could hardly call it dribbling, taking turns shooting at the basket, right? Mostly granny style. They didn't even have a three-point line back then. But right around 100 years ago, something changed. Along came another white guy who wasn't very good at the sport, but he enjoyed the game a lot and he wanted to make a difference in the sport. And he fancied himself a coach and he started gathering and training a new kind of athlete, a young, black, dynamic player profile. And he gathered the team called the Harlem Globetrotters. When the Harlem Globetrotters took the court, no one knew what would happen. They had a different brand of basketball than anyone had ever played at the top level. You only saw these moves on the playground. The Harlem Globetrotters would dribble the ball between their legs, and then they might dribble the ball between your legs. They would look one way and pass another. They might pass it behind their back or twirl the ball on their fingertips. They would steal the ball from you, and then they might steal it from each other. You just never knew what they were going to do. And so they dazzled audiences, and they confused opponents, leaving them looking confused and lost. But the key thing was they were able to do that with fundamental skills that were sound enough that they could compete toe-to-toe with the best players in the game. They had a monumental impact on the game. So if you watch a game of basketball today, whether you go to your middle school down the road or the SEC tournament that just got wrapped up yesterday, or even the pros, the game that you're watching today looks more like the game the Globetrotters played than those guys who came before. Hi there, I'm Jeff, and I know this is an ice convention, not a sports conference. I get that. And I work with RouteMan software, and I'm going to tell you in a moment why I started with basketball. But to do that, I have to tell you about a conversation I had with an Iceman halfway around the world about 7 months ago. The scene is the Packaged Ice Association of Australasia, and it's the last day. We've wrapped up, and I'm sitting at the bar with John Swan, the chairman of the association, and his good friend Gary Wing, the executive director, and their wives are down the table from us talking on their own, and we're just talking about everyday stuff, fishing or music or cars or something. And then suddenly John gets this really serious look on his face. John is the Iceman now. And he says, "We are in a time of great change." And like, that was out of nowhere. Okay, John, yeah. And he says, no, like the packaged ice industry is in a time of tremendous change. And Gary and I look at each other and look at John and say, "Yeah, John." And he says, "I don't think you're picking up what I'm putting down here. In 30 years, the industry has not changed that much. I do the same things that I used to do, and I get a new piece of equipment now and then. But think about our conference this year. Every person that got up was talking about change that's here or it's very soon. And every one of them are a huge shift." And he started going through the list, and he kind of talked about the refrigerant is changing, and the bags were supposed to be recycling. Remember, in Australia, the regulations tend to push ahead of what we're doing in the US. So there's a big focus on going to recycling. And we had two different bag people get up and talk about their solution, how they were going to try and recycle. And then we had an expert get up and talk about the power grid and the changes that were coming with the electrification. And then what are you going to do when you suddenly are supposed to have electric vehicles and there's no solutions out there? There's all these different changes. And then he looked across the table at me and said, "Jeff, you guys have been doing software for years, but I know that now you guys have the sensors where I could sit in my house or I could sit in my office and see what's in my customer's box before I go. Every one of these are monumental changes. And Gary and I looked at him one more time and said, yeah. And we all sat there for a moment and thought about John's epiphany. And he's right. We've all lived in a time of great change in our personal lives, and we're constantly being offered different changes. But many industries, like the ice industry, have people who have pushed ahead and others who haven't. So after a moment, the idea came to me to ask John. I leaned in and said, John, how does that make you feel? And he got this funny look on his face, took the last of his drink, slapped his empty glass on the table and said, time for another round and I'm buying. And he took off. I think you would like John. He's a typical Iceman. And when he's looking at all these different changes, he showed me what you guys try to juggle with every day. As business owners, as managers, you've got to decide which of these changes are crucial for me to react to or adapt to. What am I going to do to stay relevant this year? How am I going to get ahead of my competition next year? And so that's why I talked about basketball this morning. Just like 100 years ago, there was monumental change to the sport. I want to ask you, if you were to put yourself in their shoes, you and your ice company, would you be the Globetrotters? Or would you look more like the guys who came before? I know many of the ice companies in this room, and I know some of you are the Globetrotters of today in the ice industry. I wonder how many of you, when I talk about this, feel like, maybe I'm not adapting as quickly as I should. What am I going to do to be more relevant in the future? There's another group that's not represented on this screen, and that's the people who got beat and decided, hey, next year I'm going to be better. I'm going to adapt. I'm going to change because I'm not ready to retire yet. So there were many white players that were embarrassed the first time they met the Globetrotters, but they decided they were going to push to become better, to stay relevant and adapt. And I think there's a lot of folks in this room who are doing that. I want to encourage you. As I'm here this week, I don't have time in a few minutes to give you a demo of our software. We do software that's designed for ice companies. When I'm here, my goal is to talk to you, get to know you, and to see if you would be a good fit for us to do business with. And if we are, for that transition to be as quick and painless as possible. I know sometimes ice guys, when you get to talking about software, they feel like John. They just want another drink and don't want to think about it or don't know what to say. That's okay. That's my job, is to work with you, make it as quick, as painless as possible. Several of you in the room use our software. I want to thank you for your business. And I want to encourage you, if there's any questions you have, we have features and options that you may not be using. We want you to get the most out of your software, make your business as competitive as possible.